All right, we're heading right over to Mike Eppel now, who's keeping a very close eye on the markets, and we're watching China, U.S., and what it's doing to the Dow and the Asian markets this morning, Mike.
Hey, good morning, Melanie. The fear of a trade war between these two superpowers when it comes to consumer goods and economic strength. We're looking at stocks selling off this morning, a day after the Dow already tumbled by 724 points, or about 2.8%. The Trump administration following through on its threat with $60 billion worth of tariffs against Chinese goods. And China overnight announced $3 billion in a retaliatory move on U.S. pork, steel, wine, and other items. Now, from a dollar terms, we're looking at $60 billion one way, $3 billion the other. That's not really that much. It's fears, though, that this could escalate to hit other companies. And we saw yesterday shares of Boeing and Caterpillar tumble 5% each. On social media in China today, some nationalistic sentiment with consumers saying, let's boycott things like Apple and Starbucks and Coca-Cola. So that's the risk here, that this gets worse and, it ends with a global economic slowdown, maybe inflation if prices have to be raised, and that leads to higher interest rates. So a vicious cycle, and investors hate that kind of talk, and they're sending stocks sharply to the downside this morning. Overnight, we saw stocks in Japan, for example, drop by 4.5%. Now, interestingly enough, this whole thing could be diffused as quickly as it starts. We saw the Trump administration yesterday dropping tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the European Union and other countries. Of course, Canada and Mexico were originally exempt from that, and those tariffs imposed just a couple of weeks back. So maybe trying to de-escalate trade risk on that front. See where this goes. Facebook has had a miserable week from an investor standpoint and just social media commentary. The stock this week has lost about 12%. It is down again this morning. Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg, the latest to issue up an apology for the so-called breach of trust between Facebook users and Cambridge Analytics and data used for political purposes without consumer knowledge. And the fact that it took so long for the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, and Sandberg, the Chief Operating Officer, to make public statements was part of the criticism against Facebook that has been sort of slow to respond to this, and whether or not it hits advertising revenue or hits the earnings in general. Investors not too pleased, wiping out about $60 billion worth of market cap on Facebook this week. We'll also be tracking the medical marijuana producers on Bay Street today after the Canadian Senate gave approval to second reading on the legislation to lead to the legalized use of cannabis for personal use sometime maybe this summer or later this year. That should be a positive for these stocks when we're looking at the earnings on these so-called high flyers on the TSX. Likes of Canopy Growth, Aurora, and Afria, companies that really weren't in the spotlight all that much just a year ago, but have been solid performers on the TSX. And coming up today, a couple of key signals on the economy, inflation data, and retail sales reports from StatsCan, and those are going to be interesting from an interest rate standpoint for the Bank of Canada. The January inflation rate spiked because of the cost of living increase here in Ontario, which led to higher prices for restaurant items, for example. We'll see if that calmed down in the February update. We'll send it back to the studio.
And Mike, I mean, I'm looking at the board here right now, and I mean, there's a lot of red on that board.
There sure is.
The Nikkei off more than 4%.
Yeah,
right now.
It's again this. We've seen these drops for the Dow here and global markets a couple of times over the past month and a half, Kevin. But it just seems like every other day it's something new, and it's not just the trade, it's the shakeup in the White House on various department heads and
the spending
the threat of a U.S. government shutdown, which was averted, but the ongoing political discord.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. It's going to be very interesting to watch at 9:30. I would suggest you get to a business channel of some sort and watch at 9:30 because it's going to be like watching a one-sided hockey game maybe coming up.